Welcome everyone, I'm Donna Lamb, I'm the director here, and I'm thrilled to have Mari Townsend here, who's a quilt artist that has been participating in Quilting by the Lake and some of our other programs for a long, long time. So it's fun to finally have you here with your quilts. Mari is Candor Town Justice, an assistant Tioga County attorney. Like so many of our quilters, they lead double lives. So it's always really fascinating to hear the backstory for everyone. You started quilting in the 1990s with your mother?
Yes.
And returned to quilting after completing law school and passing the bar exam. Congratulations. And you didn't stop quilting, so that's good. Well, please welcome Mari Townsend.
Hello, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here because Schweinfurth is kind of a big deal. And me, as a little quilter living in Candor, never would have thought that the Schweinfurth would want me to come speak. So this is super exciting. So as Donna said in my little intro, I have been quilting, but more so crafting in some fashion for many, many, many years. When I was probably between 11 and 13 or so, my mom and I took a class at what's called the Dodge Pratt Northam Art and Community Center in the town that I grew up in, which is Boonville, New York. Yes, that's really what it's called. And so we took a class. I think I was probably between 11 and 13, so it was in the early 90s. And so this little ditty right here is one of the first quilts that I ever made. It's got puffy batting, it's tied, it's got weird colors that I don't know that I would pick today, but it still exists, it's still useful. It would be lovely for a doll's bed or what have you. And that's one of the beautiful things about quilting is you make something that's useful. It can hang on your wall, it can go on your bed, but it stays together. I mean, and sometimes you use it so much that it just wears out. But unlike other parts of my life where I spend my 9-to-5 time trying to help people do better in their lives, for a while I was an attorney in private practice, and then I was a family court public defender. And so my clients, a lot of them had made terrible decisions, and they would come to me and I would try to help them fix or undo or what have you, deal with the consequences of their terrible decisions. And we would come up with a plan, and unfortunately sometimes shortly thereafter we would have to come up with a new plan because something has changed or they changed their minds or what have you. So that's why quilting is so great, because 30 plus years later, it's still a quilt. So that was in the early 90s. I didn't have a lot of time because I was a kid and I didn't really spend my energy on making quilts at that point, but I frequently would make other things. I would sew clothing, I would knit, I would do anything else that I could get my hands on. And when I was in college, I did a little bit of sewing, but there wasn't a lot of time. I made curtains for one of my dorm rooms. They were cheesy, but they were useful. And so when I went to law school and graduated, I realized I had all this extra time in the evenings. I didn't have to study anymore. I was free. And so I said, well, wait, what do I do? Literally, what do I do with this time? And so I took a class over at Quilters Corner in Ithaca, and I relearned how to do things and how to make quilts. And eventually I joined some of the various guilds in the area. I'm a member of the Ithaca Modern Guild, the Tompkins County Guild, Candor has a quilt guild. I mean, it's pretty easy to find a group of quilters to hang out and make raunchy jokes with and have a good time. And that's my bag. So I joined the guilds, and in the guilds I heard these people talking about QBL. What is QBL? This mystical place that the real quilters, the artists, go. And I just thought, I could never do that. I'm not good enough. I don't have the resources to afford it. And, you know, I'm not worthy. And then Barbara Feinstein came to the Ithaca Modern Quilt Guild and started talking about, well, you can get a scholarship. Holy cow. So I did. And the first year that I went to QBL, let me just check my notes, was in 2015. And I came and I had a scholarship, so I didn't have to pay for the tuition. I only had to pay for the half that's the room and board. And I signed up for a dyeing class. So my friends and colleagues were saying, oh, what are you doing this summer? Oh, I'm going to Quilting by the lake. Oh, well, what lake is it by? Well, it's really not by a lake anymore. Oh, okay, well, you're going to make a quilt, right? Well, no, actually, I signed up for a dyeing class. So it was supposed to be with Jane Dunwald, but there was some sort of tragedy that made it impossible for her to travel that year. So instead, we had Susie Craby, probably not saying it properly, but she was, I think, from the Detroit area. She had studied with Jane for years, and she was fantastic. So I learned more and more about dyeing fabric, including deconstructed screen printing, which is really hard to describe, but not that hard to do, and lots of other techniques. So we'll just mosey on over here. And this quilt is something that I dyed in the class with Susie. It was a disappointment, not because of the class, but because of the fabric that I chose. Quilts are often an opportunity to learn something, and not what you would think you were going to learn. So when I first looked at this fabric, when it was still wet, it was amazing. The colors were vibrant. They were beautiful. And then I rinsed it out. And because it was some sort of sateen, it wasn't just straight, what do you call it, prepared for dyeing cotton, it mostly washed out. So here we go. And so I cut it up and I put it back together and said, I don't even like it, but I'm going to finish it. And it has a weird finish. It's just got some stiff stuff in it, and that's why it has these raw edges, so nothing is going to fray. I messed around with some stitches, random stitches on my machine, and there you go, a weird happy accident.
It's not disappointing to look at.
Oh, good.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. I mentioned deconstructed screen printing. So all of this part of this quilt is done using the deconstructed screen printing technique. So basically, you put some dye on a screen in a random pattern, kind of slop it on, and then you use some sort of goo, I don't remember if it was sodium alginate or something, that activates the dye once again, because you let it dry before you try to do anything with it. And so then, with each time you print, so here approximately is the screen that I was printing, you keep printing it over and over again and you get a slightly different result every time. So this quilt is mostly my hand-dyed fabrics. There's some commercial here, there's some silk dupiones, which I also got from QBL because there's a wonderful vendor that sells every color of the rainbow of silk dupione. Love them. So this quilt actually represents an 18-wheeler full of coal, delivering coal to our business. So in addition to being an attorney and a part-time judge, my husband and I also own a business, and it's called Hollenbeck's Feed and Coal. It's the building has been there since 1926, or it's been in formation since 1926. And so what we do, among other things, is they deliver coal 24 tons at a time. So when you see a tractor trailer driving down the road with a big rectangle on the back, it could contain coal. It can contain 24 tons of anything else too. But so when it gets delivered, the back end of the trailer lifts up, well, somehow This is the front end of the truck. This is the back end of the truck. So the middle of the truck lifts up and then it dumps out onto the ground, into whatever cavity it's going into. So I was there one day when they were getting a delivery and just thought, well, that's really neat. I'm gonna make a quilt about that. So here we go. It's actually a coal truck delivering coal. I did some hand stitching down here too. There's some circles which could kind of represent wheels, but we don't want to go too literal. So again, materials were dyed using techniques learned at Quilting by the Lake. And I have continued to dye fabric over the years because it's just fun, it's great. It does take some time away from your quilting, which can be problematic. It's kind of like when you're a knitter and you learn to spin, I imagine, because then your time goes from knitting to spinning and then you're making more product. So, but these hobbies go hand in hand. So the next year that I went to QBL was 2016, and I took a class with Rosalie Daves, who I had heard speak at, the first time I went to QBL, she was one of the evening speakers, and I just absolutely fell in love with Rosalie because she is the most wonderful person. Just loved listening to her speak. She just obviously is a brilliant artist. And so the next class that I took was about layering and transparency. And the quilt that I made in that class, the sampler, if you will, I actually gave to a friend. So this is another one that I started in that class. And it was made by layering fabrics and then cutting them away and then adding additional layers on top. So like this stripe here, which is hand dyed, is underneath the other layers, and then it was cut away. This is also hand dyed. This behind here is actually something that I printed on a jelly plate. So it's using paints. So this one doesn't go in the washing machine or anything, but it's a wall quilt. It doesn't need to. And I just enjoyed adding things on top, taking things away, and that was just a very rewarding environment for me. Plus, Rosalie is a brilliant teacher. There was one point where she told me, put an X right there on the other quilt that I was working on. And I just thought, wow, because it really made sense with the other motifs that were in the quilt. And it just, yeah, she's right, of course, she's Rosalie. So this next one is kind of a random insertion, but it's kind of a fun quilt. It's not something that I took in a class at QBL, but Victoria Finlay Wolf, I think, is probably very well known to the Schweinfurth and to QBL, and the techniques that I used in this quilt I learned from her book, 15 Minutes of Play, and then I added one of these guys. So, moving along the line here, the next class that I took at QBL was with Cynthia Corbin, and it was about letter forms. And so these next two quilts actually have a word or words in them, which you might see it when I show you, but you might just not see it, and that's okay because they're still kind of cool even if you don't see the words. And the majority of the fabric in this quilt is by Pat Pauley. There's some of my hand dyes, like this is actually the same deconstructed screen printing from the other. But these really cool ones are Pat Pauley fabrics that I probably bought at QBL or another place that she was vending. So this, I think I called it Breathe, and the word in this quilt is Om, O-M, the breath of the universe. So here's your O, and here's your M, here's another Om, and here's another Om. That was probably the most subtle, but these are my dyed fabrics, so that's okay. So I think I worked on this one when I was still in the class. That was a really productive class. I got a lot of things started, and Cynthia was really fantastic about giving us direction and inspiration and moving us towards a great outcome. And then this one, the fabric in this one was dyed by Cynthia, the multicolored fabric, and it has accents of silk du peony. Any guesses as to what word it could be? If you did, I wish I would have a prize for you because
Is it wings or like?
there is an L. There is an L-I. The next letter is G. So it's Lightning. Lightning.
I'll be darned.
And I named it Flash at Midnight because it's kind of moody, it's kind of dark. And then that's why I added these extra little hand quilting bits, kind of like big stitch hand quilting, just to give it a little more pop, a little bit more energy, so that it wasn't too flat, although it probably does have a lot of energy. So there's two of my letter forms. I really loved that class, and I have done some other words. I did joy, which was the first word that I worked on, just because when we were talking about what word do you want to use, because you can use any word under the sun, I wanted it to be something that wasn't sad. I wanted to be happy and thinking about it. And so joy, that's a great word. I couldn't find my one joy quilt though. I know I gave one to a friend and then I couldn't find the other one, so maybe I gave that one away too. It was a struggle. So then we move on to, now we're up to 2018, and this was Katie, I don't know how to say her last name, Katie PM, Katie Pasquini Nassapoost. Pretty close. And so her technique was called Artful Log Cabins, and she has a book about this technique, and it was a fantastic class. It was also filled with trauma because as I was leaving Ithaca, stopped at the quilt shop in Ithaca on my way to QBL, and my mom says, "Can you come up? Grandpa's not doing well." He was 90. He lived a wonderful life. He died on the Wednesday of Passawasco. I'm sorry, of Quilting by the Lake. So I did go see him on Sunday. I got here, I dropped my stuff off. I didn't go to the dinner. I just went back to Rome. My parents live in Rome. So I went to Rome, saw my grandfather, saw my family, and then came back. And by Wednesday, he had gone. And so this class, I think if I had been signed up for anything else, I would not have been able to go through the week because there was just something that was rhythmic and not stressful about this class. Because what you did was you took a photograph and you overlaid a grid over your photograph, but mine is not a square grid. It's got some interesting shapes. So you can see I've got seams that go like this, so it was an off square grid with some interesting angles. And my photograph was a picture of a working ship in the harbor in Bar Harbor in Maine. It's one of my favorite places to go on vacation. And so the technique, basically you look at the photograph and you use sticky notes to block out everything but the one square that you're working on. And you look at the colors in the photograph, and those are the colors that you use for your fabrics for your quilt. And so like the ship was kind of over this area, but then there was some red, and I think it had a stack somewhere on the ship, and so there was red in there. And I think this was maybe the sky and the tree line that was kind of off in the distance behind. On the other, there's a little island, and so obviously water and more of the hull of the ship that was kind of a gray, dark gray color. So it was perfect. Also, my grandfather was in the Navy, and that was a really significant thing for him. And so here I am working on a ship. Like it felt really good. And I know there are some classes that are very pressured, very intense. And I was just thankful that I was in a very safe, healthy environment where if I had a moment that I needed to just not be focused on quilts, I could do that. And so I was really excited when I finished this. It took a long time, actually. because there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. But it's very therapeutic, it's very methodical. So that was 2018, and then we come to 2019, which was the last year that I attended QBL because of COVID, and I think I was signed up for last year, or one of the years I was signed up, but ended up not attending just because I didn't want to be putting anybody at risk because we didn't know what the numbers were going to be like. But so this class was called Rock On, and it was conceived by Rosalie Dace, but Rosalie was unable to come because of some weird passport visa snafu, and so we had her, this was before we knew what Zoom really was. We had her on video for a bit, and so somehow Cynthia Corbin managed to step in, kind of coming out of retirement, and came back, and we had an awesome time. And we learned amazing things. And again, for this one, my inspiration was a picture that I had taken in Maine, but it was these rocky things that were in, not really a beach, well, beaches in Maine are rocky, but it was just this rock formation that had been worn away by the water over the years, and a lot of minerals and stuff in the rocks. So some of them look kind of this orangey brown color. And I was stepping outside of my color comfort zone because I'm really more of like a purpley blue kind of person, obviously. And so here I am with some oranges and rusts, and I love this. And I also was excited about, like, I'm going to make a quilt that's not square. I'm going to make a different quilt. So I'm actually hanging it upside down from how I would normally hang it, because I put sleeves on both ends, but normally I do hang it with this side up. But I think it looks just as cool with this side up. In the actual photograph, there were some areas that had like smaller pebbles or just smaller rocks, and so I kind of used the little 9-patch idea to represent that. But I also created a really challenging construction problem with kind of like Y seams that was ultimately resolved with just some hand get-her-done stitching, but I'll never tell where it is because I probably don't remember. And so that became a series, and I do have a couple of other pieces that are not here. There's one that's this crazy shape where it's big on the top and then it gets smaller on the bottom, and it's this color scheme. There was another one that was very similar in size and shape to this one that was in this color scheme, but that one sold. And so these three just all kind of speak to each other, and they all came out of that rock on idea. And this one, I just thought, let's put it on some Dupioni, because you can't go wrong with Dupioni. So this was the rock. This is representative of the rock on time in my life, which I'm probably not out of. I think I still have a few more in me that could come out someday. One of the other things I like to do is dye fabric, obviously. And I like to find textiles at antique shows, flea markets, what have you. So this and the one on the table here are recycled, just linens that I've dyed. And if this one has a nice damask texture to it, and if you get kind of closer to it, you can see the real texture that's in there, which you wouldn't necessarily notice as much when it was white. And I just think that one's really cool, the way that it came out with the central focal point. So this tells the story of classes that I've taken at QBL. And then we have something completely different over here. So over here, we have two pieces. One that was just kind of fun. I guess it could be a throw, but I don't dare let my cats or my dog near it because they would yuck it all up. The pattern, I think, was called Crab Apples, and I think I named it Feeling Crabby in the Forest. I think it would have been really, really busy if I had made every pattern block with all the little tiny patches. So I kind of made my own trees with the quilting and the off blocks, and I don't know, maybe it works. So that was a fun one. That's a pattern from a commercial designer, Bonnie Hunter, one of her books. She loves scrappy quilts, and so she is the crazy type of person that would say make 50 bajillion 9 patches using 1.5-inch strips, and yeah, here they are. And this last one, I have a king-size bed, and I do like to have a homemade quilt on my bed. This one used to be on our bed until the cats just made it too scary because they like to do the biscuit thing, and I really don't want biscuits made on my lovely quilt. This is the only one here that I didn't actually quilt myself. The quilting that's on this one, I quilted by check. Angie Rue from Quilting by Proxy, she's down in Binghamton. She did amazing custom quilting on this one. And the pattern is called New York Beauty. It's a pretty standard traditional quilt pattern. And I live in a log cabin, so I picked the colors based on what works in a log cabin, and greens and orangey browns work great. It took a long time. I worked on, this was paper pieced, so this part is done using paper piecing, and then the arcs have this paper in them, and then you have to rip all the paper off the back, which is, but how else do you get perfect points? You don't. So yeah, it took a really, really long time, and I think I finished this quilt in 2013, so it's still not a recent quilt. I mean, it's pretty old, but you have to be a little bit nuts to be willing to do something like this too. So it's how many king-size quilts do you need? Not that many. I'm working on one now that's hand applique, which, what's wrong with me? Why would I even do that? But it's fun, and it's portable, and I am really enjoying it. But it will be years before that's finished too. So there's me in a nutshell, up on the wall in quilts. Like I said, I'm happy to take any questions, but yes.
Do you ever pre-plan the whole quilt, or do you work it as you go along?
Sometimes I have a general idea in mind, but I wouldn't say that I ever strictly pre-plan, unless I worked, like that was from a pattern, so it was pretty darn close to pre-plan. But you never really know what direction something is going to take, and so I generally don't pre-plan.
You have a general idea, but
Yes, I kind of let it go where it wants to go, because sometimes the idea doesn't come to fruition in the way that you would have hoped it did. But I mean, it's an opportunity to do something different, and I haven't let it hold me back, I would say. Yes.
Do you see your dyed linens being like cut up and then pieced again, or how do you imagine you might use those?
I haven't really thought about cutting them up. I've done a lot of napkins, and we use cloth napkins every day at our house, so those are very useful for me. But I mean, this is a little bit of a different weave of a fabric, and I'm not sure how it would react if you cut it up and tried to sew it back together. So I've just kind of enjoyed it in these kind of contexts, use it as a tablecloth or something, use it whole. But like that one is actually patched, because people used to take care of their things and patch them instead of just throwing out and getting a new one. And that's kind of why I like dyeing them, because even if they have, they have a little stain or something, you couldn't tell, that could be really stained and you would never know. And you could also use it without being real worried that you were going to ruin it more, because you wouldn't be able to see anything. That's why it's so flexible. So yeah, I haven't really thought about cutting them up and putting them back together in some new form. But it's a good idea, because fabric is so expensive, and I have so sort of just textiles that are ripe for the picking, ready to be dyed.